And joining us now from Washington to answer your questions about the impeachment process is former U.S. federal prosecutor Joe Moreno. Joe, good to have you back on the show. Let's get to all those viewer questions that have been coming into us. The first question comes from Trudy. She asked us on Facebook, what exactly is impeachment? Just a black mark on his record? So help us out. What the heck is happening down there?
Sure, Natasha. It's certainly, really troubling times. And it's going to get worse the next few months before it gets better. So what is impeachment? Trudy, it's a good question, because even though we keep talking about the word, there's very little in our Constitution that actually explains what it is and how it works. I like the idea that you said basically it's sort of a black mark against someone, because that's kind of true. As serious as it is, impeachment alone doesn't do much, right? It's basically saying we have these offenses that we believe the president has committed, and we, the members of the House of Representatives, are voting on a majority basis to basically charge him with those offenses. Then it goes to the other body of Congress, the Senate, and the Senate can do with it as it pleases. The Constitution says a trial is to be held. It doesn't say when it is to be held. It doesn't say that it must be held, and it does not provide the rules as to how to conduct that trial. So the Senate could effectively sit on this for a long time. They could theoretically ignore it, or, of course, they could move forward with the trial, and the president, if he's not removed, simply remains president. He's an impeached president, and we've had 2 of those in our country's past. But that being said, he continues his term. He could even run for re-election next year. So you're right. As serious as all of this is, impeachment by itself isn't really the whole process. It's just the first step, and by itself, it's not certainly the end game.
Okay, so our next question comes from someone on Twitter, and they wanted to know what Democratic strategies might be used in drafting the articles of impeachment House vote and the handover to the Senate trial. What about the GOP strategy? So how exactly are the 2 sides maneuvering through all of this?
So at a high level, I'd say I think we're certainly going to see impeachment articles regarding the Ukraine phone call between President Trump and President Zelensky and the sort of facts and evidence surrounding that. I think from a strategic perspective, one of the biggest questions will be, will Democrats go beyond that? Will they reach back to Robert Mueller and the Russia probe, as some have speculated this week, to say maybe we should grab some of that and pull it into this impeachment effort as well? I've even heard people talk about possibly looking at the president's tax returns and pulling that into this impeachment process. From my view, the broader it goes, the more complicated this gets, the longer it takes, and the more likely the case falls apart. The Democrats, if they're wise, should really focus on the strongest aspects of their case, which is Ukraine, and I think that's the biggest strategic question here. I think for the Republicans, it's basically, what will the trial in the Senate look like? They can't do much about impeachment, right? They don't have the numbers. The Democrats have a strong majority. So if they want to impeach the president, they will do it. But the Republicans control the Senate. They control, again, the timing of a trial, the witnesses that get called, the testimony that's heard, the documents that are reviewed. They set the rules, and they have the majority. So it'll really flip to the Republicans' favor in terms of process if and when it goes to the Senate. And I think there'll be a lot of strategy about how they handle that entire Senate trial process.
Well, I think you've begun to answer our next question that, again, also came on Twitter. That person was asking, will they have enough votes to impeach Trump with a majority of Republicans?
Well, so remember, there's 435 members in the House of Representatives. All you need is a bare majority to impeach. So if my math is right, that's 218 votes. The Democrats have 233 seats in the House. So up to 15 Democrats could vote against impeachment, and they could still pass it without any Republicans. So basically, what it looks like now is no Republicans are interested in supporting this impeachment in the House. That being said, the Democrats have more than enough votes to pass this. The situation is different in the Senate, of course, where you need 67 out of 100 votes to remove the president. So it's a high bar there. The Republicans have 53, which means that, if all 47 Democrats voted to remove, you'd still need 20 Republicans in the Senate. Very, very difficult task.
Okay, so David also tweeted at us, and his question, again, links back to how the Senate is going to manage this. Are there any limits on how the Senate conducts the trial other than public pressure? If they thought they could get away with this, could the Senate, if they had 67%, just proceed forward, go directly to the vote?
David, interesting concept there. So the quick answer to your question is no. There's nothing in the Constitution that says how the trial should be run. Now, the Senate does have its own rules, and we've heard the majority leader, Mitch McConnell, say we have rules as to how we plan to conduct a trial, and we will follow those. That being said, you can change those rules with a bare majority. So they're not bound by any kind of law or case or constitutional prerogative. So they can conduct the trial as they want. And I like your scenario. Basically, the Republicans could do anything as far as how they conduct this trial. They can go real detailed. They can go real fast track. And so if they say, you know what, we've heard enough. We don't want to rehash all the evidence. We don't even need a trial. Let's just go to the vote and effectively just call it from day one. They could do it, and there's not much the Democrats can say about that.
Okay, so the next question is not really a question. It's a comment a viewer has made, and they wanted to get your perspective on it. Should Trump be impeached? The answer is yes, according to this person. Will a Republican-controlled Senate, terrified of primary challenges from the base, do it? No. That leaves the general election. So, Joe, what do you make of that comment?
Well, I think the comment touches on something that, is said a lot these days about this process, and that it's really not a legal process, right? This is not part of the criminal justice system. It's a political process, which means that there's not a lot of rules, there's not a lot of standards, and it's basically what every member of the House and the Senate decide that, deep down they feel was an impeachable offense committed, and should the president be removed? And each one of them has to make that decision. So whether or not the politics weigh in terms of the base versus the support versus next year's election, I mean, that's all fair game, right? These politicians are going to have to think, when I go back to my home district or my home state, how will the voters back there judge the way I conducted myself during the impeachment, during the trial, if we have one, and ultimately, how did I vote? So yes, even though it's a quasi-legal looking process, how the voters judge them must be very, very high in the minds of every member of Congress that they have to weigh in on this process, both now and if it goes to trial.
And so looking ahead to the precedent this could set, one of the experts called by the Republicans argued that this would be one of the shortest impeachment proceedings with the thinnest record of evidence, setting a worrisome standard. Would you agree with that assessment?
So that was Professor Jonathan Turley of George Washington University, and he's very well respected. He was, to your point, Natasha, he was the expert called by the Republicans. He makes a good argument, right? This is fast-tracked. There's no getting around that, right? I mean, prior impeachments went on for months, even years of investigation. We didn't even hear about Ukraine before 3 months ago. So this has been extremely quick. As far as whether or not there's enough evidence here, I can get 100 lawyers to weigh in on that, and I'll get 100 different opinions, right? You had 3 constitutional law professors yesterday say there's more than enough evidence here. You had Professor Turley saying no, there's not. So again, it's going to come down to what each member of Congress, how they judge the evidence, how they vote ultimately on whether or not to impeach and or remove the president. And then again, how the voters judge them, right? Was this a fair process? What did the evidence look like? Did the politicians take this seriously, or was it a pure partisan exercise? I mean, we'll be talking about this for a long time to come, regardless of how it ultimately turns out.
I want to pick up on that issue of the partisanship of all of this, and you're in the States. Help us understand, from the average person's perspective, if the sense is that Democrats are going to vote together in one block and the Republicans are going to vote together as another block, and nothing is really going to change except for everyone going through a lot of stress, is the general public interested in this? Do they think we have to go through this process, or are they getting fed up with this?
I mean, the polls are kind of all over the place on this lately, right? I mean, and I'm not a professional pollster. I can tell you from the handful of people that I talk to on a regular basis, a lot of the feedback I hear is that people don't really get why we're doing this. If, to your point, the outcome seems so predetermined, right? Why are we going through this knowing there's no way you're going to get 20 Republicans to break with the president in the Senate and remove him? I think Democrats would say, look, this is the one power we have control over, right? We have one House of Congress. We have control over the impeachment process, and we think it's important to make this point even if he's not ultimately removed. And again, the public will decide, right? Was this a fact-finding effort to get to the truth, to be principled and hold someone accountable, or was it a partisan waste of time?
Okay, Joe, we will leave it there. Joe Moreno is a former federal prosecutor, and he joined us this evening from Washington. Thank you, Joe.